The sun beat down on Maxwell Reed's Italian leather shoes as he stepped out of his black Range Rover, the dust of Riverdale County immediately clinging to his perfectly pressed suit. His driver rushed to his side with an umbrella, a futile attempt to shield him from the merciless summer heat. Maxwell scowled at the modest farm that stretched before him, acres of land that had once been prosperous now looking tired and worn. "Remind me again why I agreed to this meeting?" Maxwell muttered, adjusting his gold cufflinks with irritation. His assistant, Clara, hurried alongside him, tablet in hand. "Mr. Thompson has repeatedly declined your offers for this property, sir. You said a personal approach might persuade him," she replied efficiently. Maxwell sighed. At 45, he had built Reed Enterprises from the ground up, transforming a small real estate venture into a billion-dollar development company. He wasn't accustomed to being told no, especially not by a struggling farmer clinging to land that was hemorrhaging money. As they approached the farmhouse, a man emerged from the barn. Thomas Thompson wasn't what Maxwell had expected. Despite being in his 60s, he stood tall, his weathered face showing lines of hardship, but no hint of defeat. His faded denim overalls and work boots had seen better days, but there was a dignity in his stance that caught Maxwell off guard. "Mr. Reed," Thomas said, extending a calloused hand, "didn't think I'd see the day you'd visit my humble property." Maxwell's handshake was brief, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Mr. Thompson, I thought it was time we met face to face." Thomas nodded, gesturing toward the house. "My wife's prepared some lemonade. It's too hot to talk business in this sun." Inside, the farmhouse was modest but meticulously maintained. Family photos lined the walls, generations of Thompsons working the same land. Maxwell noticed a woman in many of the recent pictures, her smile radiant even as the years progressed. She wasn't present now. "My Sarah," Thomas said, following Maxwell's gaze. "Lost her to cancer last spring, fought it for 5 years." Maxwell shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry for your loss." "She loved this place," Thomas continued, pouring lemonade into mason jars. "Said it had a soul. Sounds foolish to a businessman like yourself, I suppose." Clara accepted her drink with a polite smile, while Maxwell got straight to the point. "Mr. Thompson, my final offer is $5 million for the entire property. That's well above market value, especially considering your financial situation." Thomas didn't flinch. "And what do you know about my financial situation, Mr. Reed?" "I know enough," Maxwell replied coolly. "The drought hit this county hard. Your mortgage is underwater. The medical bills must have been substantial. You're running out of options." For a moment, Thomas looked like he might ask them to leave, but instead, he sighed. "Come with me. I want to show you something." Reluctantly, Maxwell followed the farmer outside and toward the stables. The heat was stifling, and he felt sweat trickling down his back beneath his expensive suit. "This is what you're really buying," Thomas said as they entered the barn. The smell of hay and horses filled the air, a scent that transported Maxwell briefly to his childhood, to summers spent at his grandfather's ranch before ambition and wealth had consumed his life. Thomas led them to a stall where a magnificent horse lay on its side. The animal was clearly unwell, its chestnut coat dull, its breathing labored. Despite its condition, Maxwell could see it had once been extraordinary. "This is redemption," Thomas said, his voice softening. "Best thoroughbred I've ever raised. Had offers of 6 figures for him last year before he took ill." Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "And now he's dying. Another reason you should take my offer before there's nothing left to salvage." Thomas knelt beside the horse, gently stroking its neck. "The vets say it's a rare blood condition. They've given up on him." He looked up at Maxwell, something fierce in his gaze. "But I haven't." Maxwell couldn't help but laugh, a sharp sound that echoed in the quiet stable. "You're betting on a dying horse. This is exactly why you're going under, Thompson. Sentiment over sense." Clara looked uncomfortable, but Thomas didn't seem offended. Instead, he continued stroking the horse with weathered hands. "You know, redemption here has beaten the odds before. Found him abandoned as a colt, half-starved and wild. Everyone said he was too damaged, too feral to train. But Sarah saw something in him. His voice caught slightly. Just like she saw something in this land when we bought it 30 years ago when everyone said it would never yield a crop. Maxwell checked his watch impatiently. Touching story, but it doesn't change the reality. You need to sell, and I'm offering you a way out with your dignity intact. Thomas stood slowly, his knees cracking with the effort. There's an experimental treatment at Lexington. Costs $80,000 with no guarantee. If it works, Redemption could not only survive but race again. And if it doesn't, Maxwell challenged. Then I'll have done everything I could for him, Thomas replied simply. Just like I promised Sarah. Maxwell shook his head in disbelief. So you're refusing my multi-million-dollar offer to gamble on a horse that's more likely to end up in a glue factory than a winner's circle? This is exactly why farmers like you go bankrupt. Thomas's expression hardened slightly. The land's not for sale, Mr. Reed. Not today, anyway. As they walked back toward the house, Maxwell tried another approach. Look, Thompson, I understand pride, but be realistic. Even if by some miracle this horse recovers, your financial problems won't disappear. The banks won't wait forever. Thomas stopped, turning to face Maxwell directly. 3 months. Give me 3 months. If Redemption doesn't recover by then, I'll sign the papers myself. Maxwell considered this. The development plans could wait 3 months if it meant securing the property without legal complications. Besides, he was certain the horse wouldn't make it, and Thompson would be even more desperate by then. Fine, 3 months, not a day more, and I won't increase my offer when you come begging. As they reached the Range Rover, Maxwell turned back to look at Thomas standing in front of his farmhouse, the afternoon sun highlighting the determination in his stance. You're making a mistake, Thompson, Maxwell called out, betting everything on a dying horse. Thomas smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. Maybe so. But some bets aren't about the money, Mr. Reed. Something a man like you might have forgotten. As Maxwell settled into the air-conditioned comfort of his vehicle, he couldn't shake the image of Thomas with that sick horse, or the certainty in the old farmer's eyes. It was foolish, of course. Sentiment was a luxury the poor couldn't afford. Schedule a follow-up in 3 months, Maxwell instructed Clara as they pulled away, dust billowing behind them. And have our legal team prepare for a distress sale. Thompson will learn the hard way that hope doesn't pay bills. What Maxwell couldn't know, as his Range Rover disappeared down the country road, was that the bet Thomas Thompson had placed wasn't just on a horse, it was on something far more valuable. And in 3 months' time, the ruthless billionaire would discover a truth that would shake the very foundation of everything he believed. 6 weeks passed, and Maxwell Reed found himself thinking about Thomas Thompson's farm more often than he cared to admit. He'd check his watch during board meetings, wondering if the old man had come to his senses yet. The thought of that magnificent horse wasting away haunted him in odd moments, during his morning swim in his infinity pool or while signing papers for his newest acquisition. Any word from Thompson? He asked Clara one morning as she placed his schedule on his desk. Nothing, sir, she replied, her expression carefully neutral. Would you like me to reach out to him? Maxwell waved the suggestion away. No, let him come to us when he's ready to admit defeat. The truth was, Maxwell had expected a call by now. He'd seen the financial reports. Thompson was barely keeping the lights on. The bank had already issued the first warning of foreclosure. It was only a matter of time. That evening, as Maxwell sat in his penthouse overlooking the city skyline, he found himself opening his laptop and typing "blood disorders in horses" into the search bar. The articles were filled with technical terms he didn't understand, but one thing became clear. The prognosis was generally poor, and treatments were expensive with limited success rates. Fool, Maxwell muttered, closing the laptop. He wasn't sure if he meant Thompson or himself for wasting time on this. The next morning, Maxwell made a decision that surprised even himself. Cancel my appointments for the day, he instructed Clara. I'm taking a drive. 2 hours later, Maxwell's Range Rover pulled up to Thompson's farm again. This time, there was no driver, no assistant, just Maxwell in more casual attire than his usual business suits, though his idea of casual still meant a designer polo shirt and expensive loafers. The farm looked different somehow. Small improvements were visible, a freshly painted fence, new gravel on the driveway. As Maxwell approached the house, he noticed a young woman kneeling in the garden, her hands buried in the soil. She looked up as his shadow fell across her. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice friendly but cautious. "I'm looking for Thomas Thompson," Maxwell replied, studying her. She had Thomas's eyes, the same determined set to her jaw. "Dad's in the stable," she said, standing and brushing dirt from her jeans. "I'm Emma Thompson." "Maxwell Reed," he said, extending his hand. Recognition flashed in her eyes, followed quickly by wariness. "The developer. Dad mentioned you might be back." "Is the horse still alive?" Maxwell asked bluntly. Something like pride crossed her face. "Redemption's a fighter. Come see for yourself." Maxwell followed Emma to the stable, noting how she walked with purpose, her shoulders squared despite her slender frame. Inside, he found Thomas administering some kind of medication to Redemption through an IV line. The horse was still lying down, but his eyes were more alert than Maxwell remembered. "Mr. Reed," Thomas said without looking up, "didn't expect to see you before our 3-month deadline." "I was in the area," Maxwell lied. "Thought I'd check on your investment." Thomas finished with the IV before turning to face Maxwell. "Emma, could you bring us some water? I'm sure Mr. Reed is thirsty after his drive." Once Emma had left, Thomas gestured toward Redemption. "He's responding to the first round of treatments, started eating properly again last week." Maxwell approached the stall cautiously. "You found the money for Lexington?" A shadow crossed Thomas's face. Emma came home when she heard about Sarah. She was working as an equine researcher in Kentucky, brought her savings with her. Between that and selling off some equipment we weren't using. "Your daughter gave up her career to help you save a horse?" Maxwell couldn't keep the incredulity from his voice. "To save the farm," Thomas corrected. "Redemption isn't just any horse to us. Before he got sick, his stud fees alone were keeping this place afloat. One more successful racing season, and we'd have been debt-free." Maxwell studied the horse with new interest. "He was that good?" "Won the Sullivan Stakes by 3 lengths last year. Would have qualified for Kentucky if not for the illness hitting him in February." Thomas stroked Redemption's flank. "Emma's been working with a specialist. They're trying a new protocol, part of her research actually." Emma returned with glasses of water and a plate of homemade cookies. "Dad's being modest," she said, having overheard the last part. "I came back because this farm is my legacy too. And Redemption." She paused, her eyes softening as she looked at the horse. "He's special. My mom knew it first." Maxwell accepted the water, suddenly aware of his thirst. "So you're a scientist?" "Veterinary immunologist," Emma clarified. "I was studying this particular condition at the research center in Lexington. When Mom got sick, I started looking into parallels between certain cancer treatments and equine blood disorders." "That sounds complex," Maxwell said, genuinely impressed despite himself. "It is," Emma acknowledged. "But sometimes the most valuable breakthroughs come from unexpected connections." Maxwell felt oddly out of his depth. In his world, problems were solved with money or power. These people were fighting against impossible odds with nothing but knowledge and determination. "What happens if the treatment fails?" he asked, his businessman's mind unable to ignore the financial reality. Emma's expression hardened slightly. "We're not discussing failure as an option." "Emma has faith," Thomas said with a small smile. "Like her mother." Maxwell finished his water, suddenly eager to leave. The atmosphere in the stable, the quiet determination, the love evident in how they cared for the animal, made him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't articulate. "Well, I should get going," he said, placing the empty glass on a hay bale. "I'll check in again closer to our agreed date." As they walked back to his car, Emma fell into step beside him. You don't understand why we're doing this, do you? Maxwell stopped, turning to face her. I understand business decisions. This isn't one. Not everything that matters can be calculated on a balance sheet, Mr. Reed. Her voice was gentle but firm. This farm, that horse, they're part of something bigger than profit margins. Sentiment doesn't pay mortgages, Maxwell replied, repeating the mantra that had served him well throughout his career. Emma smiled, and for a moment she looked so much like the woman in the photographs, Thomas's wife, Sarah, that Maxwell felt a strange tightness in his chest. Maybe not, she conceded, but it gives us reasons to keep fighting when the numbers say we should give up. As Maxwell drove away, he found himself glancing in the rearview mirror at the farm growing smaller in the distance. He'd come to confirm what he already believed, that Thomas Thompson was throwing good money after bad, that the horse would die, and the farm would be his before the 3 months were up. Instead, he felt the first whisper of doubt. What if they succeeded? What if that horse recovered? What if there was something valuable in their stubborn refusal to surrender that Maxwell himself had forgotten somewhere along his climb to the top? Ridiculous, he muttered, pressing harder on the accelerator. He had an empire to run. He didn't have time for fairy tales about miracle horses and family farms. Yet that night, as he stood alone in his immaculate penthouse with its perfect view and untouched furniture, Maxwell Reed couldn't shake the image of Thomas and Emma Thompson side by side, fighting for something they believed in. 1 month before the deadline, Maxwell found himself once again driving toward Thompson's farm. This time, he had a purpose beyond curiosity. His company was finalizing plans for the luxury resort that would eventually replace the farmland, an exclusive getaway for the wealthy, complete with a golf course designed by a renowned architect. Investors were impatient. They wanted assurance that the project would move forward soon. As he pulled up the gravel driveway, Maxwell noticed more improvements to the property. The roof of the barn had been repaired, the farmhouse sported a fresh coat of paint, and the garden Emma had been tending now burst with color. These weren't the actions of someone preparing to sell. Maxwell frowned as he parked. He hadn't warned the Thompsons he was coming, preferring to catch them unprepared. He wanted to see the reality of their situation, not a carefully staged presentation. He spotted Emma first, leading a horse out of the stable. Maxwell did a double take, his steps faltering. The animal walking beside her couldn't be Redemption. This horse stood tall, its chestnut coat gleaming in the sunlight, head held high. Yet as they drew closer, Maxwell recognized the distinctive white blaze on the horse's face. "Mr. Reed," Emma called out, a hint of pride in her voice. "Back so soon?" Maxwell struggled to hide his shock. "That's the same horse?" "The very same," she confirmed, patting Redemption's neck. "His latest blood work came back much improved. The vet says we're witnessing a remarkable recovery." Maxwell approached cautiously. Redemption turned his head, dark eyes studying the visitor with what seemed like intelligence. "He remembers you," Emma said softly. "I doubt that," Maxwell replied, though he felt strangely affected by the horse's steady gaze. "Horses never forget a face," came Thomas's voice as he emerged from the barn. He looked tired but moved with more energy than during Maxwell's previous visits, especially one that laughed at them when they were down. Maxwell bristled. "I wasn't laughing at the horse." "No," Thomas agreed, his expression unreadable. "You were laughing at us for believing in him." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them until Emma cleared her throat. "I was just about to walk Redemption around the paddock. His strength is returning, but he needs to rebuild his muscle tone gradually." Maxwell watched as Emma led the horse toward an enclosed area. Redemption's gait was still somewhat uneven, but the improvement was undeniable. The animal that had been lying helpless in a stall 2 months ago was now walking with increasing confidence. "The treatment is working then," Maxwell said, trying to sound merely curious rather than concerned. "Better than we hoped," Thomas replied. "Emma's research partner at Lexington says they've never seen such a positive response in a case this severe. And the cost? These treatments can't be cheap." Thomas's jaw tightened. "We're managing. Emma's been able to incorporate Redemption's case into her research program, which helps with some of the expenses. Maxwell nodded, his mind racing. If the horse truly recovered, if it could race again or produce valuable offspring, the farm's financial situation might stabilize. His carefully laid plans would be at risk. "You know," Maxwell said carefully, "regardless of the horse's recovery, your mortgage situation hasn't changed. The bank won't wait forever." "We've restructured some of the debt," Thomas said, meeting Maxwell's gaze steadily. "And with Redemption improving, we've already had inquiries about future stud services." Maxwell followed Thomas toward the paddock where Emma was now guiding Redemption in a slow trot. The horse moved with increasing fluidity, its powerful muscles rippling beneath its coat. "He's a beautiful animal," Maxwell admitted, surprising himself with his sincerity. "Sarah picked him," Thomas said, his voice softening. "She always said he had the heart of a champion. Everyone thought she was crazy when she insisted we buy him, this wild, half-starved colt that no one could handle, but she saw something in him." Maxwell found himself wondering what Sarah Thompson had been like. This woman who could look at a feral colt and see a champion, who could love a struggling farm enough to call it home. "Your wife sounds like a remarkable woman," he said quietly. "She was," Thomas agreed. "Emma's just like her. Same stubbornness, same ability to see possibilities where others see only problems." They watched in silence as Emma guided Redemption through his exercises. The horse responded to her subtle commands with growing confidence. His ears perked forward, focused entirely on her. "Tell me something, Thompson," Maxwell said after a while. "Even if this horse makes a full recovery, even if he races again or produces valuable offspring, it's still just delaying the inevitable, isn't it? Small farms like yours are disappearing across the country. The economics simply don't work anymore." Thomas considered this. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we're fighting a losing battle in the long run. But this land has been in my family for generations. It's not just dirt and buildings to us. It's our heritage, our home." He turned to face Maxwell directly. "Can you understand that?" Maxwell thought of his own childhood, the series of increasingly luxurious houses as his parents climbed the social ladder, none of them ever feeling like home. He thought of his current penthouse, a showcase of his wealth but not a place that held any emotional significance for him. "No," he answered honestly. "I can't say that I do." A look of pity crossed Thomas's face, surprising Maxwell. He wasn't accustomed to being pitied, especially not by a man whose financial situation was so precarious. "That's a shame, Mr. Reed," Thomas said softly. "To build an empire but never have a home." Before Maxwell could respond, Emma approached, leading Redemption back toward them. The horse was breathing harder now, clearly tired from the exercise, but his eyes remained alert. "He did wonderfully today," she announced, her face flushed with exertion and pride. "Dr. Mercer is coming tomorrow for another evaluation, but I think he'll be impressed with the progress." Maxwell nodded, suddenly eager to leave. The Thompsons' quiet confidence unsettled him. He had expected, perhaps even hoped, to find them struggling, the horse's condition deteriorating, their resolve weakening. Instead, he found them more determined than ever, the seemingly impossible bet on Redemption beginning to pay off. "I should get going," he said abruptly. "I have meetings in the city this afternoon." As Emma led Redemption back to the stable, Thomas walked Maxwell to his car. They stopped beside the gleaming Range Rover, its luxury starkly out of place among the weathered farm buildings. "Our deadline is still 1 month away," Maxwell reminded him, regaining some of his usual authority. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Thompson." Thomas nodded calmly. "We'll be here, Mr. Reed. Redemption too." As Maxwell drove away, the image of the recovering horse walking proudly beside Emma stayed with him. For the first time, he considered the possibility that Thomas Thompson might win their bet, and what that would mean for his development plans. More troubling, though, was the question Thomas had raised. What did it mean to build an empire but never have a home? It was a question Maxwell Reed had never allowed himself to contemplate, and now, as he returned to his world of boardrooms and balance sheets, he found he couldn't quite shake it from his mind. Maxwell stared at the architectural renderings spread across his desk, but his mind kept drifting back to Thompson's farm. 2 weeks remained until their agreed deadline, and his development team was growing anxious. They'd already begun preliminary marketing to select investors, highlighting the exclusivity of the planned resort, the pristine views, the privacy. No one had mentioned the possibility that the land might not be available. "Sir?" Clara's voice broke through his thoughts. "The investors from Dubai are waiting in the conference room." Maxwell nodded, gathering the renderings into a folder. "Have we heard anything from our contacts at First National about Thompson's mortgage situation?" Clara hesitated. "That's complicated, sir. It seems someone has been helping them restructure their debt. The foreclosure warnings have been withdrawn for now." Maxwell frowned. "Who would help them? Thompson doesn't have that kind of financial network." "We're not sure," Clara admitted. "The bank is being unusually tight-lipped about it." This was an unexpected complication. Maxwell had been counting on financial pressure to force Thomas's hand, regardless of the horse's condition. Now it seemed the old farmer had found an ally. The meeting with the investors went smoothly on the surface, but Maxwell could sense their unease when he mentioned the Thompson property acquisition was still in progress. One of them, a sharp-eyed woman named Amara, lingered after the others had left. "Mr. Reed," she said directly, "I've never known you to present a project without having full control of the necessary properties. Is there a problem we should be aware of?" Maxwell forced a confident smile. "Just a minor delay in paperwork. The land will be ours within 2 weeks." Amara studied him for a moment before nodding. "I hope so. My partners are particularly interested in this location." After she left, Maxwell canceled his remaining appointments and called his driver. An hour later, he was once again on the familiar road to Thompson's farm, a sense of urgency driving him forward. This time the farm was busy with activity. A small crowd had gathered near the training track at the far end of the property. Maxwell parked and walked toward them, curiosity overriding his impatience. As he drew closer, he saw Redemption on the track, Emma in the saddle, guiding him through a slow canter. The spectators, mostly local farmers and what appeared to be equine professionals, watched with obvious appreciation. The horse that had been at death's door 3 months ago was now moving with growing confidence, his stride lengthening as Emma gave him more rein. "Quite a transformation, isn't it?" said a voice beside him. Maxwell turned to find Thomas watching his daughter and Redemption, pride evident in his weathered face. "I have to admit, I didn't think it was possible," Maxwell replied honestly. Thomas nodded. "Most didn't. That's why they've come to see for themselves. Word's getting around about the miracle horse of Riverdale County." Emma completed the circuit and slowed Redemption to a walk, bringing him toward the small crowd. The horse was breathing hard, sweat darkening his coat, but his eyes were bright and alert. As they approached, the onlookers broke into spontaneous applause. "He's still got a ways to go," Thomas said. "But Dr. Mercer believes he'll be ready for light racing by fall." Maxwell felt a twinge of unease. "That's still months away. Your financial situation is no longer your concern," Thomas interrupted firmly. "We're managing, Mr. Reed." Before Maxwell could press further, a tall man in an expensive suit approached them. Unlike the other visitors, he didn't have the look of a local farmer or horse enthusiast. There was something familiar about him that Maxwell couldn't quite place. "Mr. Thompson," the man said, extending his hand to Thomas. "That was remarkable. Your daughter has done incredible work with him." "Thank you, Mr. Lawrence," Thomas replied. "Emma's the real miracle worker here." The man, Lawrence, turned to Maxwell with a look of recognition. "Maxwell Reed. I thought that was you. Small world." Maxwell finally placed him. "Andrew Lawrence. Thornhill Investments, right?" Lawrence nodded. "I'm surprised to see you here. Didn't realize you were a horse racing enthusiast." "Mr. Reed has been following Redemption's recovery with great interest," Thomas said, a hint of irony in his voice. "He's been quite invested in the outcome." Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Well, you picked a winner to follow. I've just been discussing sponsorship possibilities with Mr. Thompson. Redemption's story is exactly the kind of inspirational narrative our firm likes to associate with. Maxwell felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Andrew Lawrence represented one of the largest investment firms in the country. If they were backing the Thompsons, the financial pressure Maxwell had been counting on would evaporate completely. Sponsorship? He managed to ask. Preliminary discussions only, Thomas clarified. But Mr. Lawrence believes Redemption's comeback story could have significant commercial appeal. Lawrence smiled. People love an underdog, or in this case, an underhorse. The thoroughbred that came back from the brink of death to race again. That's marketing gold. Emma joined them then, having handed Redemption off to a young stable hand. Her cheeks were flushed with exertion, her eyes bright with triumph. "He did beautifully," she said, accepting a bottle of water from her father. "His endurance is improving every day." She noticed Maxwell and her expression cooled slightly. "Mr. Reed, come to check on your investment." Before Maxwell could respond, Lawrence spoke up. "I was just telling your father how impressed I am. My daughter's a huge horse fan. She'd love to meet Redemption sometime." "Anytime," Emma replied warmly. "He loves visitors, especially children." As the conversation continued, Maxwell found himself increasingly sidelined. The dynamic had shifted dramatically since his first visit. The Thompsons were no longer desperate farmers clinging to false hope. They were at the center of a potential business opportunity that could transform their fortunes. Eventually, the crowd began to disperse. Lawrence departed with promises to have his legal team draft a preliminary sponsorship agreement. Maxwell lingered, waiting until he and Thomas were alone before speaking. "You never mentioned you were talking to investors," he said, unable to keep a note of accusation from his voice. Thomas shrugged. "You never asked. Besides, they came to us. Word gets around when a horse makes this kind of recovery." "So our deal is off then?" Maxwell asked directly. "Our deal," Thomas reminded him, "was that I would sell you the farm if Redemption didn't recover within 3 months. As you can see, he's recovering remarkably well." Maxwell felt frustration rising. "Recovery is subjective, Thompson. The horse can walk, even run a bit, but he's hardly back to racing form. Dr. Mercer has officially declared his condition as in recovery," Thomas replied calmly. "The blood work confirms it. The specialist from Lexington has documented the entire process for medical journals. By any objective standard, Redemption has defied the odds." Maxwell knew he was losing ground. He changed tactics. "What about Emma? Does she plan to stay here indefinitely? Give up her research career to run a struggling farm?" Something like uncertainty flickered in Thomas's eyes for the first time. "That's between Emma and me." "She's talented," Maxwell pressed. "I can see that. But is this really the best use of her potential? Buried in a small-town farm that's one bad season away from bankruptcy?" Thomas's expression hardened. "You don't know anything about my daughter, Mr. Reed, or what she values." "I know ambition when I see it," Maxwell countered. "And I know how quickly dreams can turn to resentment when reality sets in." Before Thomas could respond, Emma approached, having overheard the last exchange. Her eyes flashed with anger. "My dreams aren't your concern, Mr. Reed," she said firmly. "Neither is my career. I'm exactly where I want to be." Maxwell looked between father and daughter, recognizing the same stubborn determination in both their faces. For now, at least, his plans for Thompson's farm would have to wait. 2 weeks, he reminded them. "Our agreement still stands until then." As he walked back to his car, Maxwell couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing control of a situation he had once considered a sure thing. The Thompsons, the horse, even the farm itself, all had proven more resilient than he had anticipated. And somewhere deep inside, beneath his frustration and concern for his business interests, a small part of him was beginning to admire their tenacity. With only 1 week left until the deadline, Maxwell found himself unable to sleep. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, the city lights spread before him like a constellation of stars. In his hand, He held a tumbler of expensive scotch, barely touched. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. Successful, powerful, alone. His phone chimed with an email notification. It was from his head of research, containing information he'd requested about Emma Thompson. Maxwell had asked for a discreet background check, telling himself it was just due diligence. The report was impressive. Emma had graduated top of her class from Cornell's veterinary program, followed by specialized research at Lexington's prestigious Equine Medical Center. She had published several well-received papers on equine immunotherapy and had been on track for a significant research grant when she suddenly took an extended leave of absence to return home. There was a photo attached, Emma receiving an award at a veterinary conference, her smile bright, her future promising. Maxwell stared at it for a long moment. Why would someone with her potential abandon it all for a struggling farm? Another image floated into his mind. Emma guiding Redemption around the track, their movements synchronized, a partnership built on trust and determination. Perhaps she hadn't abandoned her potential at all. Perhaps she was fulfilling it in ways Maxwell couldn't understand. The thought disturbed him. He had built his life on a simple principle. Success meant moving forward, upward, never looking back. The idea that someone might deliberately choose a different path challenged everything he believed. His phone rang, cutting through his thoughts. It was Clara, which was unusual at this late hour. "Sir, I'm sorry to disturb you," she said, her voice tense. "But there's something you should know about the Thompson property." Maxwell's grip tightened on the phone. "What is it?" "Our sources at the county records office report that Thomas Thompson has filed paperwork to designate the farm as a historic agricultural landmark. If approved, it would severely restrict development options for the property." Maxwell felt a surge of anger. He can't do that. The property doesn't qualify. It's just a small farm, not some historical site. "Apparently," Clara continued, "the farm was a stop on the Underground Railroad. There's a hidden cellar beneath the old barn that was used to shelter escaping slaves. The Historical Society is already expressing support for the designation." Maxwell closed his eyes, processing this new complication. "How did we miss this in our initial research?" "It wasn't widely known," Clara admitted. "The Thompson family kept it quiet for generations, but now Thomas is using it against me," Maxwell finished. He thanked Clara and ended the call, his mind racing. This changed everything. Even if Redemption's recovery faltered in the final week, even if Thomas agreed to sell, the historical designation could derail the entire development project. The Thompsons had outmaneuvered him. Morning found Maxwell back on the road to the farm, determined to confront Thomas directly. As he pulled up, he noticed several vehicles parked near the barn, including a van from a local television station. A reporter and cameraman were interviewing Emma near the paddock where Redemption grazed, looking healthier than ever. Maxwell parked and approached, catching fragments of the interview as he drew closer. "Combination of innovative immunotherapy and traditional remedies," Emma was explaining. "My research at Lexington focused on similar cases, but Redemption's recovery has exceeded all expectations." "And this treatment could help other horses with the same condition?" the reporter asked. "Potentially, yes. We're documenting everything for peer review. This could represent a significant breakthrough in equine medicine." The reporter noticed Maxwell hovering at the edge of the frame and turned. "Mr. Reed, perfect timing. Would you care to comment on Redemption's remarkable recovery? I understand you've been following the case closely." Maxwell froze, unprepared for the camera suddenly swinging in his direction. Emma watched him with a mixture of surprise and wariness. "I'm just a concerned neighbor," Maxwell said carefully. "The Thompsons' determination has been impressive." Emma raised an eyebrow at this diplomatic response but said nothing. The reporter, sensing potential tension, pressed further. "As one of the largest landowners in the county, do you support efforts to preserve historical farms like this one? We understand the Thompson property may soon receive historic landmark status." "So it was already public knowledge." Maxwell maintained his composure, aware of the camera recording his every expression. "I believe in progress," he said evenly. but also in respecting history. If the Thompson farm qualifies for such designation, that would certainly be noteworthy. The interview concluded shortly after, and the news crew packed up their equipment. Emma approached Maxwell as they drove away. "That was diplomatic of you," she said, studying his face. "I half expected you to announce your development plans on camera." "Where's your father?" Maxwell asked, ignoring her comment. "We need to talk." "He's meeting with the Historical Society in town. Should be back this afternoon." Emma crossed her arms. "I'm guessing Clara told you about the landmark application." Maxwell's surprise must have shown on his face because Emma smiled slightly. "Small towns, Mr. Reed. People talk, especially when a powerful developer keeps asking questions about a particular property." "This isn't a game, Emma," Maxwell said sharply. "That designation could impact property values throughout the region." "It's not a game to us either," she replied, her voice equally firm. "This farm matters, not just to my family but to history. Those stories deserve to be preserved." Maxwell gestured toward the news van disappearing down the driveway. "And the publicity? The interviews? Is that about preservation too? Or is it about making sure I can't develop this land even if your father does decide to sell?" Emma's expression hardened. "You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about you or your development. It's about doing what's right. For redemption, for this land, for the legacy my mother believed in." The mention of Sarah Thompson gave Maxwell pause. "Your mother knew about the Underground Railroad connection." "She discovered it," Emma said, her voice softening slightly. "She was cleaning out the old barn cellar and found hidden compartments, names carved into the beams. She spent years researching, documenting, tracing the families who passed through here on their way to freedom." Her eyes glistened. "When she got sick, she made me promise we'd protect this place. Not just for us, but for them, the people whose courage and suffering are part of these walls." Maxwell was silent, absorbing this. The farm wasn't just a business asset to the Thompsons. It was the physical embodiment of promises kept and stories preserved. He thought of his own family history. Sanitized, curated, the uncomfortable parts conveniently forgotten or rewritten to better fit the narrative of success. "Show me," he said suddenly. Emma blinked. "What?" "The cellar, the Underground Railroad evidence. Show me." She hesitated, then nodded. "Follow me." She led him to the old barn, past Redemption's stall where the horse watched them curiously, and toward a heavy wooden door set into the floor. It took both of them to lift it, revealing worn stone steps descending into darkness. Emma flicked on a flashlight and led the way down. The air below was cool and earthy, the ceiling low enough that Maxwell had to duck his head. The flashlight beam swept across rough stone walls and ancient timber supports. "Here," Emma said, directing the light toward one of the beams. Maxwell stepped closer. Carved into the wood were names, dates, small symbols, rough markings that had survived more than a century and a half. "Daniel, 1853, he read aloud. "Mary and child, 1855. "People who passed through here," Emma explained quietly. "They risked everything for freedom. The Thompsons of that generation risked everything to help them." Maxwell ran his fingers over the carvings, feeling the weight of history in a way he never had before. These weren't just names in a textbook. They were real people who had stood in this very spot, terrified, hopeful, determined. "There are letters too," Emma continued. "Correspondence between my ancestors and others in the network. Records of those who made it to Canada. Stories that haven't been told." For a moment, Maxwell saw the farm through different eyes, not as acres to be developed, but as ground hallowed by courage and sacrifice. He thought of the resort he had planned, the golf course that would plow through these fields, the luxury condos that would replace these historic buildings. "Your father should have told me about this from the beginning," he said finally. Emma's flashlight illuminated her face, showing a sad smile. Would it have mattered? 3 months ago, Would you have seen anything here but dollar signs? Maxwell had no answer for that. They climbed back into the sunlight in silence, each lost in thought. As they emerged, Redemption nickered softly from his stall, as if welcoming them back. "He's looking stronger every day," Maxwell observed, grateful for the change of subject. "He is," Emma agreed. "Dr. Mercer says his latest blood work is nearly normal. He thinks Redemption might be ready for a short race in another month." They walked toward the horse, who stretched his neck over the stall door to greet them. Emma produced an apple from her pocket, which Redemption accepted with gentle lips. "You know," Maxwell said, watching the interaction, "I still don't understand why you came back. With your qualifications, you could be working anywhere, doing groundbreaking research. Instead, you're here, fighting to save a farm that most people would consider a lost cause." Emma stroked Redemption's forehead, considering her answer. "Some people spend their lives running toward success," she said finally. "Others realize that success might be right where they started." She looked directly at Maxwell. "I'm not giving up my research. I'm applying it in the place that matters most to me. Is that really so hard to understand?" For Maxwell Reed, who had spent his entire life defining success as the distance traveled from his starting point, it was indeed hard to understand. But standing there in the sunlight, watching Emma with the horse that defied all odds, he felt the first stirrings of doubt about the path he had chosen and the values that had guided him for so long. 3 days before the deadline, Maxwell sat in his downtown office, staring at the urgent messages piling up from investors and board members. The Dubai Group was growing impatient, threatening to pull their substantial funding if the Thompson property wasn't secured immediately. His board was questioning his leadership, wondering why a simple land acquisition had become so complicated. "They've scheduled an emergency board meeting for tomorrow," Clara informed him, placing another stack of documents on his desk. "The chairman wants a definitive answer on the Thompson property." Maxwell nodded, barely listening. His mind was still in that cellar, seeing those names carved into ancient beams. He'd spent the past few days researching the Underground Railroad history of the county, discovering that the Thompson farm had indeed been a significant waypoint on the journey to freedom for dozens, perhaps hundreds of enslaved people. "Sir?" Clara prompted. "What should I tell them?" Maxwell sighed. "Tell them I'm handling it personally." After Clara left, Maxwell opened his laptop and pulled up the resort development plans. He'd spent millions on these designs, on environmental studies, on marketing materials. Walking away would be an enormous financial hit, not to mention the damage to his reputation. Yet something had changed in him since he'd seen those carvings, since he'd watched Emma with Redemption, since he'd begun to understand what the farm meant to the Thompsons. For the first time in his career, Maxwell was questioning whether success could be measured solely in profit margins and square footage. His phone rang. Andrew Lawrence from Thornhill Investments. "Reed," Maxwell answered, steeling himself. "Maxwell," Lawrence began without preamble, "I'm calling as a courtesy. My firm is preparing to announce a substantial investment in Thompson's farm. We're positioning it as a historic preservation project with an equine therapy component. Emma's research has enormous potential, both medically and commercially." Maxwell felt his stomach tighten. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I know you've been interested in the property. This is your chance to get on the right side of this story. The press conference is tomorrow afternoon." After ending the call, Maxwell sat motionless. Lawrence's announcement would effectively end any chance of acquiring the farm for development. The publicity would make it impossible to move forward without appearing as the villain who tried to bulldoze a historic landmark and destroy a promising medical research program. He needed to see the Thompsons one more time before making his decision. As he drove toward the farm, the familiar landscape seemed different somehow. Not just potential real estate, but land with stories, with meaning. When he arrived, the farm was quieter than during his previous visit. No news crews, no visitors. Just Thomas sitting on the porch, watching the sunset with a cup of coffee in his weathered hands. "Thompson," Maxwell called as he approached. Thomas didn't seem surprised to see him. "Reed. Figured you'd be by before the deadline." Maxwell climbed the porch steps, declining Thomas's wordless offer of a chair. "I understand Lawrence is announcing an investment partnership tomorrow." Thomas nodded. "News travels fast." "Why didn't you tell me about the Underground Railroad connection when we first met?" Maxwell asked, the question that had been nagging at him for days. Thomas set his cup down, considering his answer. "Would it have mattered? 3 months ago, you saw nothing here but dollar signs and development potential. You'd have dismissed it as sentimental nonsense." It was almost exactly what Emma had said in the cellar. Maxwell couldn't deny the truth of it. "Where is Emma?" he asked, changing the subject. "At the track with Redemption. He's doing his first serious training run today." Maxwell nodded, then gestured toward the pastures stretching toward the horizon. "Your family has owned this land for generations. Didn't you ever think about selling before I came along, making life easier for yourself?" Thomas looked out at the fields, golden in the evening light. "Every farmer thinks about selling when times get tough, but this land, it's not just soil and grass. It's sacrifice and struggle and joy. It's where Sarah and I built our life, where Emma grew up." He turned to Maxwell. "Some things you don't sell, no matter the price. Even if it means watching your daughter give up a promising career to save it." Thomas's expression softened. "You still don't understand Emma. She hasn't given anything up. She's found a way to do her research here, where it means something personal to her. The therapy program she's developing with Redemption could help countless other horses, and people too." Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "People." "Equine therapy," Thomas explained. "Emma's planning to work with veterans, troubled kids, people recovering from trauma. Redemption's story resonates with them. The fighter who came back from the brink." Maxwell absorbed this, seeing yet another dimension to the farm's significance that he had missed entirely. "She never mentioned this." "You never asked," Thomas replied simply. "You were too busy calculating property values to see the real value here." The words stung, but Maxwell couldn't dispute them. He had seen the farm as nothing but a business opportunity, the Thompsons as obstacles to be overcome, Redemption as a dying animal not worth saving. How wrong he had been about all of it. "I'd like to see this training run," Maxwell said finally. Thomas studied him for a moment, then nodded and stood. "This way." They walked together toward the track at the far end of the property. As they approached, Maxwell could see Emma in riding gear, guiding Redemption through warm-up exercises. The horse looked magnificent, coat gleaming, muscles defined, head held high with the confidence of an athlete in his prime. "Hard to believe that's the same animal I saw dying in a stall 3 months ago," Maxwell said quietly. "Faith and science," Thomas replied. Emma had both. They watched in silence as Emma and Redemption took their position at the starting point. A man with a stopwatch, presumably Dr. Mercer, raised his hand, then dropped it. Redemption exploded forward, his powerful legs driving him around the track with breathtaking speed. Emma leaned low over his neck, moving in perfect harmony with the horse, her face alight with concentration and joy. Maxwell found himself holding his breath as they rounded the far turn, Redemption's stride strong and sure. As they thundered down the final stretch, Dr. Mercer was shouting something, his expression one of disbelief and excitement. When Emma finally slowed Redemption to a walk, bringing him around in a cool-down lap, she was laughing, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Mercer was shaking his head, staring at his stopwatch. "What happened?" Maxwell asked Thomas. "What did I just see?" Thomas's voice was thick with emotion. "If I'm not mistaken, Redemption just ran a time that would qualify him for the Sullivan Stakes, the same race he won before he got sick." As Emma dismounted, patting Redemption's neck and murmuring praise, Dr. Mercer approached them, his expression still stunned. "It's unprecedented," he was saying as they drew close enough to hear. "His cardiovascular recovery is extraordinary. If these numbers hold up in another trial, we're looking at a medical case study for the journals." Emma spotted her father and Maxwell approaching. Her smile dimmed slightly at the sight of the developer, but her eyes still shone with triumph. "Did you see?" she called to Thomas. "He flew. Just like before. Thomas embraced his daughter, pride radiating from him. I saw. Sarah would have loved to see it too. Maxwell stood awkwardly to the side, feeling like an intruder on this family moment. He'd come to deliver an ultimatum, to make one final business pitch before the deadline expired. Now, witnessing this victory, those intentions seemed hollow and inappropriate. Emma turned to him, her expression curious. "Mr. Reed, come to check on your investment one last time?" Before Maxwell could respond, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Clara. "Board insisting on decision by morning. Dubai investors threatening to walk if Thompson property not secured." Maxwell pocketed the phone, the corporate world suddenly seeming very distant from this track where a miracle had just unfolded. "Congratulations," he said instead. "What redemption just did, what you've accomplished with him. It's remarkable." Emma studied his face, perhaps searching for the sarcasm or calculation she'd come to expect. Finding none, she nodded. "Thank you. It's been a long road." "I'd like to hear more about this therapy program you're planning," Maxwell said, surprising himself with his sincerity. "Perhaps over dinner? All of you," he added quickly, glancing at Thomas. Emma and her father exchanged confused looks. "You're welcome to join us at the house," Thomas offered cautiously. "Nothing fancy, but Emma makes a mean beef stew." As they walked together toward the farmhouse, Maxwell felt something unfamiliar stirring within him, a sense of connection, of being part of something genuine. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, the demands of his corporate empire calling. But for the first time in his adult life, Maxwell Reed chose to ignore it, at least for one evening. Whatever decision awaited him tomorrow, tonight he wanted to understand the story of a horse that came back from the brink, a family that refused to surrender, and a farm whose value couldn't be calculated in dollars and cents. The Thompson farmhouse kitchen was nothing like the sleek professional kitchens in Maxwell's various properties. This one showed signs of actual use: well-worn countertops, mismatched chairs around a sturdy oak table, copper pots hanging from a rack overhead. The refrigerator door was covered with photographs, recipe cards, and a calendar marked with veterinary appointments and farm deliveries. Emma moved with easy confidence as she served the beef stew, the rich aroma filling the room. Thomas poured red wine into simple glasses, nothing like the crystal stemware Maxwell was accustomed to using. "This is Sarah's recipe," Emma explained as she placed a basket of fresh bread on the table. She insisted good food was medicine for the soul. Maxwell took a tentative bite and was surprised by the depth of flavor. "It's excellent," he said, genuinely impressed. "Mom would be pleased to hear that," Emma replied with a small smile. "She always said you could tell a lot about people by how they responded to homemade food." There was an awkward pause as they all acknowledged the strangeness of this situation. The developer who wanted to bulldoze their farm now sitting at their dinner table, praising a family recipe. "Tell me about this therapy program," Maxwell said, breaking the silence. "How does it work?" Emma's eyes lit up, her reserve melting as she described her vision. "There's substantial research showing the therapeutic benefits of working with horses, especially for people dealing with PTSD, anxiety, depression. Horses are incredibly sensitive to human emotions. They mirror what we're feeling, forcing us to confront things we might otherwise avoid." "And redemption specifically?" Maxwell asked, genuinely curious. "His story resonates," Emma explained. "Here's an animal that faced death, that suffered, that had to fight his way back. People who've experienced trauma connect with that narrative. It gives them hope." Thomas added quietly, "Sarah always believed redemption had a purpose beyond racing. Even before he got sick, she'd talk about how gentle he was with children, how intuitive." Maxwell noticed a photograph on the wall, Sarah Thompson standing beside a younger redemption, her hand on his neck, a look of absolute joy on her face. "She loved him," Maxwell observed. Thomas nodded, his eyes on the photograph. "More than that, she understood him. When he first came to us, he was wild, dangerous. The previous owners had mistreated him. Most people wanted nothing to do with him, but Sarah. He paused, swallowing hard. She'd just sit in his stall for hours, talking to him, being present. Didn't try to force anything. Eventually, he started trusting her. Mom always said redemption taught her more about patience than anything else in her life, Emma added softly. Maxwell felt an uncomfortable parallel forming in his mind. Like redemption, he had spent his life keeping people at a distance, trusting no one, viewing relationships as transactions. The thought that he might have something in common with the horse he had dismissed as worthless was unsettling. When Sarah got sick, Thomas continued, redemption seemed to know. He'd stand by the window of her room for hours. When she was too weak to go to the stables, I'd bring him to the house so she could see him from her bed. Emma rose abruptly, moving to refill their glasses, but Maxwell caught the sheen of tears in her eyes. He realized how fresh this grief still was, how much courage it took for them to share these memories with a virtual stranger, especially one who had threatened their home. Then redemption fell ill, Maxwell said quietly, putting the timeline together. Thomas nodded. 2 months after we lost Sarah. It was like he'd lost his will to live. The vets couldn't explain the sudden onset. He looked at Emma. That's when Emma came home. I couldn't lose them both, Emma said simply, resuming her seat. Mom and redemption. They were connected somehow. Saving him felt like keeping a part of her alive. Maxwell had never believed in such intangible connections. In his world, relationships were strategic, emotions were weaknesses to be managed. Yet sitting in this warm kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of a life built on love and shared purpose, he found himself questioning his certainties. When I first saw him lying in that stall, Maxwell admitted, I thought you were foolish to try saving him. It seemed like throwing good money after bad. And now? Thomas asked. Maxwell considered the question. Now I understand it wasn't just about money. It never was. After dinner, Emma showed Maxwell her research notes, detailed observations of redemption's treatment, blood work results, recovery milestones. It was impressive, rigorous science conducted in a farmhouse office rather than a state-of-the-art laboratory. You could publish this, Maxwell noted, scanning the meticulous documentation. That's the plan, Emma confirmed. Dr. Mercer is helping me prepare it for a medical journal, but the real work is just beginning. Redemption's case could help establish protocols for other horses with similar conditions. As the evening drew to a close, Thomas walked Maxwell to his car. The night was clear, stars visible in a way they never were in the city. For a moment, both men stood in silence, looking up at the vast expanse above them. You know, Thomas said finally, Sarah used to say that the stars remind us how small our problems really are. The universe doesn't care about property values or development projects. Maxwell smiled slightly. My board of directors might disagree. Your board isn't here, Thomas pointed out. Just you. Making your own choices. The words stayed with Maxwell as he drove back to the city, the lights of his skyscrapers replacing the stars as he approached downtown. In his penthouse, he stood again at the window, looking out at the empire he had built. It had always filled him with satisfaction before. Tonight, it felt hollow. His phone had dozens of missed calls and messages, all demanding decisions, commitments, actions. The board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. The Dubai investors wanted an answer by noon. His lawyers were preparing documents for either outcome. Maxwell barely slept. When morning came, he dressed with particular care. His most expensive suit, his power tie, the gold cufflinks that had become something of a signature. Armor for the battle ahead. The boardroom fell silent as he entered. 12 faces turned toward him, expectant, impatient. The chairman, Walter Grisham, didn't waste time on pleasantries. Maxwell, this situation has dragged on long enough. The Thompson property is essential to the Riverdale Resort project. The investors are losing confidence. We need resolution today. Maxwell nodded, taking his seat at the head of the table. I understand the concern. I've been handling this personally, as you know. And? Walter prompted. The deadline you arranged with Thompson is tomorrow. Do we have a commitment from him or not? Maxwell opened the folder before him, containing the latest resort designs, cost projections, marketing materials. Months of work, millions of dollars already invested. Before I answer that, he said carefully, I'd like to share some new information about the property. For the next 20 minutes, Maxwell outlined what he had learned, the historical significance of the farm, Emma's research and therapy program, Redemption's remarkable recovery, and what it might mean for equine medicine. He presented it all with the same precision and authority he would use for any business proposal. When he finished, Walter looked unimpressed. Fascinating history lesson, Maxwell, but how does this change our plans? If anything, it sounds like Thompson has leveraged these factors to increase the property's value. What's your strategy to overcome these obstacles? Maxwell looked around the table at his fellow board members, successful men and women who measured value in the same ways he always had. They were waiting for him to outline a ruthless acquisition plan, perhaps involving political pressure to block the historic designation or financial maneuvers to force Thomas's hand. 3 months ago, that's exactly what he would have done. Today, the words wouldn't come. I've made a decision, Maxwell said finally. We're going to withdraw our interest in the Thompson property and redesign the resort project for an alternative location. The boardroom erupted, Walter's face flushed with anger. That's unacceptable. We've invested too much to simply walk away. The Dubai group will pull out entirely. Perhaps, Maxwell acknowledged, or perhaps they'll appreciate the opportunity to be part of something more innovative, more meaningful than just another luxury resort. As the arguments continued around him, Maxwell remained calm. For the first time in his career, he was making a business decision that couldn't be justified by profit projections or market analysis. He was choosing to honor something intangible, the legacy of a family, the healing of a horse, the preservation of history that deserved to be remembered. I understand this is unexpected, Maxwell said when the noise subsided. I'm prepared to personally cover the costs we've incurred in planning for the Thompson property. But my decision is final. We'll find another way forward. As he left the boardroom, ignoring the heated discussions that continued behind him, Maxwell felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the lightness that comes with absolute certainty. Whatever consequences followed, he knew he had made the right choice. He had one more visit to make before the deadline expired, one more conversation with the family and the horse that had somehow changed everything. The morning of the deadline, Maxwell drove to the Thompson farm for what he knew would be a pivotal moment. The familiar road now held memories, each visit marking a step in his unexpected journey from ruthless developer to someone he hardly recognized anymore. His phone had been ringing non-stop since the board meeting. Walter had threatened to call for his resignation. The Dubai investors had indeed pulled out. His carefully constructed empire was showing the first cracks in its foundation. Strangely, Maxwell felt more at peace than he had in years. As he pulled up to the farmhouse, he noticed a flurry of activity. Several cars were parked in the drive, including Andrew Lawrence's sleek Mercedes and a van from the local news station. He'd arrived in the middle of Lawrence's press conference announcing the investment partnership. Maxwell parked at a distance and walked toward the gathering. On the lawn, chairs had been arranged for the small audience of reporters and local officials. Lawrence stood at a podium with Thomas and Emma beside him, Redemption tethered nearby, looking magnificent in the morning sunlight. This partnership represents a new chapter for Thompson Farm, Lawrence was saying as Maxwell approached. Not only will we preserve this historic site for future generations, but through Emma Thompson's groundbreaking research and therapy program, we'll create a center of healing for both horses and humans. Maxwell lingered at the back, unnoticed for now. He watched as cameras flashed, as Thomas shook Lawrence's hand with dignity, as Emma stepped to the microphone to outline her vision for the therapy center. She spoke with passionate conviction, her expertise evident in every word. This was a woman who had found her purpose precisely where she needed to be. Redemption's recovery isn't just a miracle story, Emma was explaining. It's a scientific breakthrough with applications for equine medicine worldwide. But more importantly, it's a template for the work we'll do here with people who need their own path to healing. As if on cue, Redemption tossed his head, drawing smiles from the audience. The horse that had been at death's door now stood proud, a living symbol of resilience. When the formal statements concluded, Lawrence invited questions. A reporter stood addressing Emma. "Dr. Thompson, there were rumors that Reed Enterprises planned to purchase this property for a luxury resort development. How does today's announcement affect those plans?" Before Emma could answer, someone in the crowd noticed Maxwell. Heads turned, murmurs rippled through the gathering. Lawrence looked momentarily taken aback, clearly not having expected Maxwell's presence. Emma recovered quickly. "Perhaps Mr. Reed would like to address that question himself," she said, her eyes finding his in the crowd. All attention shifted to Maxwell. He felt the weight of expectation. These people were waiting for him to play the villain, to announce some aggressive countermove or legal challenge. Instead, he walked forward calmly, accepting Emma's gesture toward the microphone. "Good morning," he began, surveying the curious faces before him. "Reed Enterprises did indeed have plans for a resort development that would have included the Thompson property. Those plans have been withdrawn." A murmur of surprise ran through the crowd. A reporter immediately followed up. "Mr. Reed, is this withdrawal due to the historic landmark application, or is it related to legal pressure?" Maxwell shook his head. "Neither. It's simply the right decision. This farm, as you've heard today, has significant historical and now medical importance. Some places deserve to be preserved, not developed." The reporters exchanged glances, clearly skeptical of this uncharacteristic stance from one of the region's most aggressive developers. Lawrence studied Maxwell with open curiosity. "Mr. Reed," another reporter called, "this represents a significant financial loss for your company. Are your shareholders supportive of this decision?" Maxwell smiled slightly. "Let's just say there have been some spirited discussions, but leadership sometimes requires making unpopular decisions based on values, not just valuations." After a few more questions, Lawrence wrapped up the press conference. As the crowd dispersed, Maxwell found himself face to face with Thomas and Emma, both regarding him with a mixture of surprise and cautious respect. "That was unexpected," Thomas said quietly. "For me too, in some ways," Maxwell admitted. Lawrence approached, extending his hand. "Bold move, Reed. Not many CEOs would publicly walk away from a project of that magnitude." Maxwell accepted the handshake. Sometimes the most valuable investments aren't the ones that show up on a balance sheet. Lawrence nodded thoughtfully. "If you're interested in a different kind of investment, we should talk. This therapy center could use additional backing, assuming you're willing to let the Thompsons maintain control." "I might be," Maxwell replied, surprised by his own openness to the idea. As Lawrence moved away to speak with some lingering reporters, Emma turned to Maxwell. "Why?" she asked simply. Maxwell looked past her to where Redemption grazed peacefully, seemingly unaware of his role in the day's events. "3 months ago, I laughed at your father for betting everything on a dying horse," Maxwell said. "I couldn't understand why anyone would take such a risk with no guaranteed return. Now I see what I was missing." "And what was that?" Thomas asked. "That some things are worth fighting for precisely because their value can't be calculated," Maxwell replied. "Your farm, your family legacy, your mother's memory," he added, looking at Emma. "Redemption." Emma studied him, perhaps searching for any hint of insincerity. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Thank you. For seeing it eventually." "Would you mind if I spent a few minutes with him?" Maxwell asked, gesturing toward Redemption. Emma looked surprised but nodded. "Of course." Maxwell walked alone to where Redemption stood. The horse raised his head as Maxwell approached, ears forward with interest. Up close, the transformation was even more remarkable. The dull coat now gleamed with health, the once sunken eyes bright and alert, the formerly wasted muscles now defined and powerful. "Hello, Redemption," Maxwell said quietly, extending his hand palm up as he'd seen Emma do. The horse stretched his neck, sniffing Maxwell's hand before gently butting his head against it. Maxwell felt an unexpected surge of emotion at this simple gesture of acceptance. Carefully, he placed his hand on the horse's neck, feeling the steady pulse of life beneath the warm coat. Redemption stood calmly, seeming to understand the significance of the moment. "You proved me wrong," Maxwell murmured. "We both know you weren't supposed to survive, let alone thrive. Yet here you are." Redemption nickered softly, as if acknowledging the observation. From a distance, Thomas and Emma watched the interaction, giving Maxwell his privacy, while ensuring Redemption was comfortable. "I've spent my life believing that moving forward meant leaving things behind," Maxwell continued, stroking the horse's neck. "Success was always about the next acquisition, the next development, the next victory. I never understood what it meant to stay, to rebuild, to heal." Redemption's large, intelligent eyes seemed fixed on Maxwell's face, the horse completely still as if listening intently. "Your Sarah saw something in you that others missed," Maxwell said. "Emma, too. They had faith when logic said it was foolish." He smiled ruefully. "I'm beginning to understand why." After a few more minutes, Maxwell rejoined Thomas and Emma, feeling strangely lighter. "He's a remarkable animal," Maxwell said. "He is," Emma agreed. "Though I suspect you didn't come all this way just to tell us you're withdrawing your offer. You could have sent a lawyer for that." Maxwell nodded, appreciating her directness. "I have a proposal, not for buying your land, but for partnering in this therapy center. I'd like to establish a foundation to support your work. Research grants, facilities, whatever you need. No strings attached, no control over your operations." Thomas looked skeptical. "Why would you do that?" "Because what you're creating here matters," Maxwell answered simply. "And because I've spent my career building things that look impressive but don't heal anybody or preserve anything worth remembering." Emma exchanged a glance with her father. "We'd need to discuss the details carefully." "Of course," Maxwell agreed. "Take all the time you need. I've learned the value of patience, thanks to you, and to him," he added, looking back at Redemption. As they walked toward the farmhouse to discuss the potential partnership further, Maxwell felt a peculiar sense of homecoming, not to a physical place, but to values he'd long ago abandoned in his pursuit of success. He thought of the names carved in those cellar beams, of Sarah Thompson's legacy of compassion, of Emma's choice to return to her roots, of Thomas's unwavering faith, and of Redemption, the horse that had, against all odds, found his way back to health and purpose. Some might say Maxwell Reed had lost this round, failed to acquire a prime property, alienated his board, jeopardized his position, but standing on the farm he had once seen only as acreage to be developed, surrounded by people he had once viewed merely as obstacles, Maxwell knew differently. For the first time in decades, he had made a choice based not on what he could gain, but on what he could preserve. Not on what would profit him, but on what would benefit others. Not on cold calculation, but on the understanding that had dawned in him since that first visit, when he'd laughed at a farmer who bet everything on a sick horse. Some bets, he now understood, were never about the money at all. 6 months later, Maxwell stood at the railing of Lexington Downs, watching as the horses paraded toward the starting gate for the Sullivan Stakes. Among them, resplendent in blue and gold silks, was Redemption. The horse pranced with barely contained energy, his recovery now so complete that few would believe he had once lain dying in a stall. "Nervous?" asked Emma, joining Maxwell at the rail. She was dressed in a blue suit that matched Redemption's colors, a small hat perched atop her hair. Despite her professional appearance, Maxwell could see the tension in her eyes. "Shouldn't I be asking you that?" he replied with a smile. "It's your horse racing today, not mine." Emma laughed. "True, but you've got almost as much invested in this as we do." It was true, though not in the way most would assume. The past 6 months had brought seismic changes to Maxwell's life. His decision to withdraw from the Thompson property had indeed triggered a boardroom coup. Walter Grisham had rallied enough support to force Maxwell out as CEO of Reed Enterprises. The business press had a field day with the story, Real estate tycoon toppled by farm sentiment, one headline had read. But even as one chapter closed, another had opened. The Maxwell Reed Foundation was established with an initial endowment of $50 million, a significant portion of his personal fortune. Its mission, to support historic preservation, equine therapy, and medical research, with the Thompson Farm serving as its flagship project. "Dad's beside himself," Emma said, nodding toward Thomas, who stood closer to the track, deep in conversation with the jockey. "I haven't seen him this alive since Mom was here." Maxwell nodded. The transformation in Thomas had been remarkable. The weary farmer fighting to save his land had become energized as the therapy center took shape, as redemption regained his strength, as hope replaced desperation. "How are the therapy programs going?" Maxwell asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd been hands-on with the foundation, visiting the farm weekly. "Better than we expected," Emma replied. "We've got a waiting list now for the Veterans Program, and the research grant came through for the pediatric applications. We're expanding faster than I thought possible." "Because of you," Maxwell said sincerely. "Your vision, your expertise." Emma shook her head. "Because of all of us. Dad's practical knowledge, your business acumen and connections, Dr. Mercer's medical supervision, and redemption. He's the heart of it all." As if on cue, Redemption's name was announced over the loudspeaker. The crowd murmured with interest. Many knew the story of the miracle horse who had come back from a devastating illness to race again. The press had covered it extensively, especially after Maxwell's dramatic career change. "Ladies and gentlemen, entering Gate 7, Redemption, owned by Thompson Farm, ridden by Michael Davis. This remarkable thoroughbred returns to racing after overcoming a rare blood disorder that nearly claimed his life earlier this year." Emma gripped the railing, her knuckles white. "I know he's ready physically, but part of me is still terrified. What if he gets hurt again?" Maxwell understood her fear. He'd grown surprisingly attached to Redemption himself, spending hours watching the horse train, occasionally even helping with grooming. The animal's gentle strength and resilience had become a symbol to him of his own transformation. "He was born to run," Maxwell reminded her. "You've done everything possible to ensure he's healthy. Trust him now." The horses were loading into the gates. Redemption entered calmly, a testament to his temperament. The jockey, Michael Davis, had worked patiently with him for months, rebuilding the partnership necessary for racing success. Thomas joined them at the rail, his face a mixture of pride and anxiety. "This is it," he said quietly. "Sarah would have loved to see this day." Maxwell had heard enough about Sarah Thompson over the past months to feel he almost knew her. Her photographs still adorned the farmhouse walls. Her recipes were still used for family meals, to which Maxwell was now regularly invited. Her spirit, he had come to believe, somehow lived on in the farm, in Thomas and Emma, and especially in Redemption. The starting bell rang. The gates flew open. 14 thoroughbreds burst forward in a thunder of hooves. Redemption broke cleanly, settling into 5th position as they rounded the first turn. "He's pacing himself," Thomas observed, nodding with approval. "Smart boy." Maxwell found himself holding his breath as the horses thundered down the backstretch. Redemption began to move up, his stride powerful and fluid. By the final turn, he had advanced to 3rd, then 2nd, challenging the leader. "Come on," Emma whispered. "Come on, Redemption." The crowd was roaring now, the 2 lead horses neck and neck in the final furlong. Michael Davis urged Redemption forward with subtle guidance. The horse responded, finding an extra gear that only champions possess. As they crossed the finish line, Redemption's nose was ahead by half a length. The crowd erupted. Emma threw her arms around her father, both of them crying openly. Maxwell stood momentarily frozen, overwhelmed by emotions he hadn't expected. This wasn't just a horse race. It was the culmination of a journey that had changed all their lives. "He did it!" Emma exclaimed, turning to include Maxwell in the celebration. "He actually did it!" The winner's circle was a blur of photographers, reporters, and well-wishers. Redemption stood at the center, draped in flowers, seeming to understand the significance of the moment. He held his head high, occasionally nickering softly when Emma or Thomas stroked his neck. "Mr. Reed," called a reporter, pushing toward him, "as the financial backer of Thompson Farm, how does it feel to see Redemption's victory today?" Maxwell smiled, shaking his head. "I'm not the owner, just a friend of the farm. This victory belongs to the Thompsons, to Redemption, and to the memory of Sarah Thompson, who saw his potential first." Later, after the ceremonies and interviews, the three of them walked Redemption back to the stables. The horse was calm now, the excitement of the race replaced by a quiet satisfaction that seemed almost human in its expression. "I need to thank you," Thomas said to Maxwell as they watched Emma remove Redemption's saddle. "Not just for the foundation, the financial support, though that's been crucial, but for seeing what we saw, eventually. For understanding why this mattered." Maxwell nodded, watching as Redemption lowered his head to nuzzle Emma's shoulder affectionately. "I should be thanking you, all of you." He paused, formulating thoughts that had been developing for months. "I had everything by society's standards, wealth, power, status, but I had nothing that truly mattered. No real connections, no purpose beyond the next acquisition." "And now?" Thomas asked. Maxwell smiled. "Now I have something better. A chance to build something that heals, rather than just impresses. A legacy that might actually deserve to be remembered." As they settled Redemption into his stall for the night, Maxwell reflected on the irony of his situation. He had lost his company, alienated his business associates, been labeled a fool by the financial press. By every metric he had once valued, he had failed spectacularly. Yet standing here, watching the bond between this remarkable horse and the family that had refused to give up on him, Maxwell felt richer than he had in his entire life. "We're having a small celebration dinner back at the farm tomorrow," Emma said as they walked toward the parking area. "Nothing fancy, just close friends. Would you join us?" "Close friends," Maxwell repeated, tasting the words. Throughout his rise to wealth and power, he had accumulated associates, allies, admirers, but few he could genuinely call friends. "I'd be honored." As they parted ways for the evening, Maxwell glanced back at the stables. Somewhere inside, Redemption was resting, a champion once again. The horse that had been deemed worthless, that smart money said to abandon, had proven every calculation wrong. In saving Redemption, the Thompsons had held fast to values that couldn't be quantified. And in the process, something unexpected had happened. They had helped save Maxwell Reed from the hollow empire he had built around himself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities. The therapy center was expanding, research advancing, lives being changed. There was purpose in the work ahead, meaning that transcended balance sheets and profit margins. For the first time in decades, Maxwell found himself looking forward not to what he could acquire, but to what he could contribute. And it had all begun with a bet on a sick horse that, against all odds, had been worth taking. 1 year to the day after Maxwell had first driven up to Thompson Farm with acquisition on his mind, he stood in the newly constructed therapy center, watching as a young girl tentatively approached Redemption. The child, no more than 8, with leg braces and a determined expression, held out an apple on her flattened palm, just as Emma had taught her. Redemption, the champion racehorse who had won the Sullivan Stakes and 2 other major races since his comeback, lowered his head with gentle patience. His lips carefully took the apple, and the girl's face lit up with delight. "He likes me," she whispered, looking up at Emma with wonder. "He does," Emma confirmed, her professional demeanor softened by the magic of the moment. "Redemption is an excellent judge of character." Maxwell smiled, observing from a respectful distance. This was the real victory. Not the races, not the prize money, but moments like these. The therapy center now hosted dozens of sessions weekly, serving veterans with PTSD, children with physical challenges, adults recovering from trauma. Redemption was the star, but the program had expanded to include 5 other horses, each with their own story of rescue and rehabilitation. "Quite a change from last year," Thomas said, joining Maxwell by the viewing window. The older man looked healthier, more vibrant than when they'd first met. The crushing weight of potential loss had been replaced by purposeful activity. In every possible way, Maxwell agreed. After being forced out of Reed Enterprises, Maxwell had surprised everyone, including himself, by not fighting to regain control. Instead, he had embraced his new role as the foundation's director, applying his business acumen to expanding its impact. The corporate world had initially mocked his downfall, but as the foundation's work gained recognition, the narrative had shifted. Now he was regularly invited to speak at conferences about purpose-driven leadership and ethical business practices. "The Historical Society is coming next week to finalize the landmark status," Thomas informed him. "They're bringing a team to properly document the cellar and preserve the carvings." Maxwell nodded with satisfaction. The Underground Railroad history of the farm was now a central part of its identity, with educational programs developed in partnership with local schools and universities. What had once been viewed as an inconvenient obstacle to development had become a precious resource for understanding the past. "And how are the wedding plans coming along?" Maxwell asked with a knowing smile. Thomas chuckled. "Emma's trying not to make a fuss, but you know Dr. Mercer. He wants to do things properly." The romance between Emma and Dr. Mercer had blossomed gradually over months of working together on Redemption's recovery and the therapy program. Their shared passion for healing, for both animals and people, had formed the foundation of a relationship that surprised no one who knew them. Sarah would have approved, Thomas added quietly. "I believe she would," Maxwell agreed. He had come to think of Sarah Thompson almost as someone he had known, though they had never met. Her presence was palpable in the farm, in the family's stories, in the vision that had taken shape here. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Maxwell wondered if she had somehow orchestrated all of this, bringing together a sick horse, a grieving family, and a lost soul in need of redemption. Through the window, they watched as the therapy session continued. The little girl was now brushing Redemption's coat, her physical therapist guiding her movements to strengthen specific muscle groups. The horse stood perfectly still, occasionally turning his head to check on his young friend. "I've been meaning to ask you something," Thomas said, his tone more serious. "The board of Reed Enterprises has approached me about selling a portion of our back acreage for a scaled-down version of their resort." Maxwell raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Walter Grisham came to you directly?" Thomas nodded. "He said since you were no longer involved with the company, there might be room to negotiate a compromise. A smaller development that wouldn't impact the historic areas or the therapy center." "And what did you tell him?" "That I'd think about it." Thomas turned to face Maxwell directly. "What do you think? You know both worlds now." Maxwell considered the question carefully. A year ago, he would have seen only the business opportunity. Now he understood the complexity, the competing values, the need for balance. "I think," he said slowly, "that preservation and progress don't have to be enemies. A thoughtfully designed development that respects the land's history and current purpose could actually support your work here. But only if the terms are truly on your terms, not theirs." Thomas nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. "That's what Emma said too. We're meeting with them next month. I'd appreciate it if you'd join us, as our advisor, not theirs." "I'd be honored," Maxwell replied, touched by the trust this request represented. Their conversation was interrupted by Emma opening the door to the arena. "Dad, Maxwell, Lily would like to show you what she and Redemption have been working on." They entered the space where the little girl, Lily, now sat proudly on Redemption's back, supported by her therapist but beaming with accomplishment. "Look at me," she called. "I'm riding him all by myself." "You certainly are," Maxwell replied, genuinely impressed. "Redemption looks very happy to have you as his rider." Redemption, as if understanding the conversation, nodded his head and nickered softly. The sound never failed to warm Maxwell's heart, a reminder of the day in the stable when he had laughed at Thomas's faith in this very horse. Later that evening, as had become their custom, Maxwell joined the Thompsons for dinner at the farmhouse. The kitchen remained unchanged, still homey, still filled with photographs and memories, But the conversation around the table had evolved. Where once there had been worry and defiance, now there was planning and purpose. Dr. Mercer had joined them, bringing a bottle of wine to celebrate another successful week at the center. The research paper on Redemption's treatment protocol has been accepted by the Journal of Equine Medicine, Emma announced, her face flushed with pride. They're featuring it in the next issue. That's wonderful news, Maxwell said, raising his glass, to Dr. Thompson and her groundbreaking work. As the meal progressed, Maxwell found himself observing the scene with a sense of profound gratitude. Here, in this simple farmhouse kitchen, he had found something his wealth had never provided. A place where he belonged, where his contribution mattered not because of his money or power, but because of who he had become. After dinner, as the summer evening stretched into a golden twilight, they walked together to the paddock where Redemption grazed. The horse trotted over when he saw them, always eager for attention. "You know," Maxwell said, stroking Redemption's sleek neck, "when I first came here, I thought I understood value. I could look at any property, any business, any person, and calculate their worth down to the dollar." "And now?" Emma asked. Maxwell smiled, watching as Redemption nuzzled Thomas's pocket in search of treats. "Now I understand that the most valuable things in life are the ones you can't put a price on. Friendship, purpose, redemption." The double meaning of the word hung in the air, acknowledged by gentle smiles all around. As the sun set behind the rolling hills of the farm, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, Maxwell Reed, once defined by acquisitions and developments, found himself exactly where he needed to be. The empire he had built might have crumbled, but in its place stood something far more enduring, a life rich in meaning, in connection, in purpose. And it had all begun with a bet on a sick horse that a wise farmer had refused to abandon. Thomas Thompson had gambled everything on Redemption, seeing value where others saw only liability. In the process, he had taught a powerful man the most important lesson of his life: that true worth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the courage to believe, the determination to heal, and the wisdom to recognize that sometimes the greatest investments are the ones that transform not just balance sheets, but hearts. As darkness fell and stars appeared above the farm that had changed everything, Maxwell silently thanked the horse that had started it all. Redemption gazed back at him with knowing eyes, the champion who had defeated not just illness, but the cynicism of a world that too often confused price with value. Some bets, Maxwell now understood with perfect clarity, were worth far more than anyone could ever calculate. Some gambles paid dividends no spreadsheet could capture, and some victories couldn't be measured in finish lines crossed but in lives transformed, one healing step at a time.